and welcome to the next instalment of the Research and Ethics video series for 2020 to 2023. My name is Megan Goodwin, and I'm a registered music therapist and commission member of the Research and Ethics Committee for the World Federation of Music Therapy, and I am based here in Melbourne, Australia. I am pleased to be completing a research interview today with fellow Melburnian and Australian music therapist, Dr Jeannette Tamplin. Dr Jeannette Tamplin holds a PhD, a Master of Music, a Bachelor of Music with Honours, and is a registered music therapist here in Australia. Dr Tamplin is also a senior lecturer for the University of Melbourne and works as a music therapist at the Royal Talbot Rehabilitation Centre, Austin Health and Epworth Hospital. Jeannette is a registered music therapist and researcher specialising in neurorehabilitation for people with neurological injuries or conditions, including traumatic brain injury, stroke, spinal cord injury, Parkinson's disease, and dementia. She's a previous NHMRC-ARC Dementia Research Development Fellow from 2016 to 2019. Jeannette has 20 years of clinical experience working as a music therapist in neurorehabilitation, and her research in this area focuses on the therapeutic effects of singing, speech and language rehabilitation, therapeutic songwriting, and coping and adjustment following traumatic injury or illness. In addition to conducting research, Jeannette supervises PhD students and serves as the president of the Australian Music Therapy Association. Jeannette publishes her work regularly at national and international conferences and publishes in international and interdisciplinary journals. She's been invited to contribute chapters to several edited books in music therapy and has also co-authored a book on music therapy methods in neurorehabilitation, a clinician's manual with Jessica Kingsley Publishers, and co-edited a book on music and dementia from cognition to therapy with Oxford University Press. Welcome, Dr. Tamplin. We are so grateful that you accepted our invitation to be one of the people we interviewed for the 2020 to 2023 Research and Ethics video series, which will be posted on the World Federation of Music Therapy website for all of our members and visitors of the site to see. So can I begin by getting you to introduce yourself and your research experience, including potentially your PhD, research in practice, and any funded research projects that you've been working on?
Sure. Well, thank you, first of all, for the invitation. It's really exciting to be able to waffle on about my research experience and passions and projects. So, yeah, you've got me on a topic that I like talking about, which is handy. So I've been working at the University of Melbourne now since I finished my PhD, so since 2013, and doing a variety of researching in a number of different areas over that time. But maybe just to lead up to that, I did my first exploration into research was with my research masters, which was back in 2004 and 5, where I did a study. So my clinical background is in neurorehabilitation, so working with adults who are rehabilitating from stroke, acquired brain injury, traumatic brain injury, or spinal cord injury primarily. And I've always been very fascinated with the potential for therapeutic singing to be used in rehabilitation. So that's kind of like where a lot of my research kind of hinges around in different ways. And so my first research project was looking at dysarthria and articulation and clarity of speech for people who had a acquired neurological speech problem, which is dysarthria. Yeah, so I did a multiple case study, I guess you would call back then, and was looking. I'm very much an objectivist researcher, so I like looking at things objectively and measuring things and counting things and stuff like that. But I do also tend to incorporate a little bit of some qualitative data to sort of add some richness or to explore and explain some of the things that I'm interested in. Yeah, so that was the start. And then I did a PhD in, when was it? It was around I had my first child, so about 2007, between 2007 to 2011, I guess, or 12. And I was looking at that. I sort of fell into that one from applying for a research grant and thinking I would never get it. And then I got it, and then I had to turn into a PhD. So it was a happy story in the end, but it was an interesting segue into research. I actually had someone come to me and say, a singing lecturer at the university, this was before I was working at the university, came to me as a clinician at the hospital where I worked in the spinal ward and said, I've got this singing student who is like a high-level quadriplegic, and he shouldn't be able to do the things that he's doing. Like he's doing things like abdominal breathing, and I don't know how he's doing it. And the head rehab consultant at the hospital was also quite interested with this fascinating case and said, why don't we put in a research proposal to get funding from a scheme that was around at the time, a government scheme. And we thought, no one will ever fund this. It's too specific, music therapy and spinal injury. Like, why would they care? Why would they give us money? We ended up splitting it into two parts, like a little preliminary investigation, like how do people with spinal injury sing? Let's measure their muscles and see what happens and compare them to someone without a spinal injury, an able-bodied person. And then we'll put another study in which they won't fund this time, but we'll come back and do this one, which was, if we give them a singing intervention, will it improve their speech, projection and their breathing and things like that. Anyway, they loved them both and said, we want to fund them both, put them back together, we'll give you all the money. So I was like, oh my gosh, this is now my PhD.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. So that was the start of my, I guess, catapulted me into research more full time. Yeah, so I did that study, which was really exciting and definitely came out of all of my clinical work. And I still practice one day a week clinically, so I try and keep my my research questions embedded, like it keeps you fresh, and being connected with patients. And I think if I didn't actually do any clinical work, it would make everything else seem a bit too removed and a bit dry. So I really like having that balance. And I think that's where you get your ideas and your questions for like what's important to research, because it's relevant and it's current. So that's sort of been the start of the research journey for me. And as I said, definitely evolved a lot out of my clinical work. And I do tend to get a lot of referrals just generally, or we do at the hospital, for communication related goals and addressing those through music therapy. So it kind of and also, like I said, I'm quite passionate about singing as a therapeutic modality. So it kind of brings those two things together for me. Having said that, I also have done some research with songwriting and
Is that more recently or?
No, well, I was on an ARC, an Australian Research Council, for probably this is a world federation, so people won't know the acronyms, but Australian Research Council funded project looking at with Professor Felicity Baker and a whole range of other people, looking at the effect of songwriting for processing changes in identity after a neurological injury or illness. And so that was kind of a multi-phase project over a couple of years. We did a pilot study with inpatients, and then we looked at like the timing, like, when someone has a spinal cord injury, for example, like, is it too soon when they're still in hospital? Are they still just in the moment of recovering and dealing with being in rehab, and then the identity change and everything? So we wanted to look over time, like, is it better 3 months after they leave hospital, or is that too soon? Do they need it 12 months after, when reality is really setting in and they know what their life's going to look like? So we looked at it over different time frames. But that was a really fun project because we got to develop this songwriting intervention that was particularly targeted to this identity, changing in identity protocol that we developed.
So I'm obviously aware that you've done a fair bit of research more recently as well. Would you be able to expand a little bit about the Dementia Research Development Fellowship that you had from, I think it was 2016 to 2019, roughly?
Yes, definitely. So I was really fortunate to be able to get one of these government-funded research fellowships. The Australian government, and I think probably worldwide, has been governments have been putting money into dementia research because it's just such a big and growing issue. We need to they're putting money into trying to find a cure and to work out why it's happening and how to stop it. But also because it's growing at such a rate and our population's aging, we really need interventions and strategies for how to help people live well with dementia and to have the best quality of life and to reduce symptoms as much as possible.
Yeah.
I put in a proposal to look at community-based therapeutic singing groups for people with dementia. And we were coming, I worked with other researchers at the university on some of these projects as well. So we called it the reminiscing, with the sing in highlighted as singing. And we were looking at ways to support people still living at home. So kind of in the earlier stages before, and I think the trend in Australia and possibly, in lots of countries is to try and keep people in their homes for as long as possible for a number of reasons. It's less expensive on the health system if they're at home. And also it's a better environment for them. It's familiar. If their memory is deteriorating, it's better to be in familiar surroundings and with familiar people around you for as long as possible. But it's also really hard for people to be in that situation with the needs kind of growing. So we wanted to be able to support carers in that process. And we know that previous research has shown that singing's great for well-being for well populations, condition specific populations. It's useful in lots of different ways. So we think it's really important to be able to support not just the person with dementia and the carer who's got sometimes their own health issues going on and they're watching their loved one gradually sort of deteriorate with this horrible condition, but also the quality of their relationship. So that's what we really wanted to try and support. So we created these reminiscing singing groups where people could come together and experience being together and support their relationship. So that was the plan for that study. Do you want to know the things that went wrong with the study?
Absolutely.
So we had this wonderful plan. It was like a 2-phase research project. We did a little pilot. So I actually co-facilitated this first choir that we set up with Dr Imogen Clark, who I work with at the University of Melbourne as well. And it was great. It was my most favourite thing to do at the time in the week. It was such a great experience. And we thought, okay, we had not really any trouble recruiting to that group. We kind of did some feasibility testing of the measures. And then the plan was to do a really big randomised control trial and we were aiming for like 150 to 180 people. We had budget. We were going to set up these choirs all over Melbourne and even in regional areas and roll it out, do some big testing. But we just struggled to recruit for this study. So recruitment, I think, is always the bane of every researcher's life. But I think in dementia, in home-based dementia, it might be even next level difficult. And I did speak to a lot of different people who were recruiting from a similar population, and they warned me at the start that it's really hard to recruit. And I was like, I know, but we did this massive media push. We're on TV, radio, did so much promotion, and still really struggled. So I think what we've learned, and we're continuing on with other dementia projects post that, which I can talk about as well, but just this issue of recruiting for people with dementia who are living at home, I think it's a really stressful time. People are getting a diagnosis, they're trying to adjust to it. They're either at that early stage where they're in denial, or they're trying to come to terms with the fact that this is happening, so they're not going to sign up for a study. And then if it's right at the other end, it's getting too hard. And there are so many things going on, things are difficult, so it's also hard to enroll in a study. And it's frustrating because it's like, there's probably a whole cohort of people. The people that you really want to recruit are the ones that are struggling, isolated, need support, but they're also the people that aren't you don't know how to access them, and they're not signing up. So it's kind of this, like, there's this need there, but it's really hard to get people. So I guess that's the frustration part of the study. I mean, the research in this area.
Do you think that carer burnout played a role in the lack of recruitment as well, just because there's so much stress and burden on the carer to get the person with dementia to the groups? And
I think so, yeah. And even like just from doing some assessments, like we were doing home visit assessments, and when I was training our assessors, I went out and did some, and just going out into the home and seeing, how it is like caring for someone with dementia, and the difficulties that they're just getting them dressed, and they don't understand what's going on, and they have to get in the car, and so there's lots of barriers to particularly to a face-to-face intervention. Like now with COVID, we're doing so many things online, so we're kind of getting around that problem in a little way with people with dementia. So I've been involved in the Homeside study, which is a large international research collaboration, again in dementia, and also again in home-based, like family caregivers. We're recruiting dyads again, so carers and people with dementia. So similar in that way, but it's more of a train the carer how to use music intervention. It's more than just music, because it's a randomized control trial. So we're comparing standard care waitlist group, control group, and a reading intervention as a comparison to a music intervention. So we're training carers in how to use strategies, either reading strategies or music strategies, to support their care. Same things, still issues with recruitment, although it's really interesting with this one, because I'm now the country leader for Australia. So, we regularly meet, the country leaders all meet together and get to hear how we're each going in recruitment. And so we've got Australia, the UK, Poland, Germany and Norway are the 5 countries that are in the study. And some countries are doing really well. So UK and Germany are flying through and getting heaps of people, and Australia's going okay. And so it's different in different countries for some reason. And I think we're exploring why that is, working on a paper about recruiting in dementia studies at the moment. So trying to sort of tease out what works and what doesn't, and so many things that you would think that are almost like side issues to research that become really forefront. Like if you can't get participants, you can't do research. So it's a pretty big issue.
Absolutely, especially in our field as well, I think.
Yeah.
Where there's such a cry for research across all areas of music therapy. So it's so important, and then we struggle with recruitment. Bit of a challenge. I also know you've done some research in Parkinson's disease.
Yes, I have actually had less issue recruiting with Parkinson's, which is interesting. Yeah, I don't know if it's because Parkinson's is a bit more of a sort of
slower progression.
People tend to get it earlier, and it's a slower progression. So they're kind of living with the condition for longer. My experience with the Parkinson's community in Melbourne is that everyone is super keen to be involved in research. Like just that real wanting to contribute to anything they can to try and help battle or find answers or solutions and things. So in the pilot study that we did, we were recruiting people. We didn't randomly allocate people to groups. We let people sign up for singing groups at different frequencies, so weekly groups or monthly groups, Parkinson groups. And then because we wanted to have a comparison, we asked people if they'd like to sign up and be a control participant, basically. So you'd think, well, why would people do that? And they did. They just went, I'll put up my hand and I'll just do all the assessments and just carry on with my life because I want to contribute to research. So just for the greater good, people are doing it. But that Parkinson project was really great. We were looking in you know, there are, again, similarities. That's that common thread through a lot of the research that I do about singing. And this was, again, supporting people with Parkinson's and their carers to attend therapeutic singing groups, community-based therapeutic singing groups. But with the Parkinson, I guess the difference between the reminiscing or the dementia groups was that it was more focused, the primary focus was on voice and communication.
Yep.
And preventing that decline in communication.
Thank you so much for sharing all your research experience. You talked very early on in the piece about the methodologies that you use. Have they been similar across the bulk of your research projects?
I would say so. Like, I think the first study I did was obviously a bit smaller. It was a master's project and time limited and not funded.
Yeah.
And then, since I've been, like, I suppose the more funding you get, the changes the scope of the research you can do. So, I think with the PhD, we probably had about 35 participants. That's probably one important factor in methodology. But not so much in terms of like where your epistemology comes from. So like I said, I tend to align myself a lot more with objectivist research. That's just kind of the way that I work. I don't know if it's because I work in a medical setting or if that's why I work in a medical setting, but that's kind of the research that I'm drawn to. But like I have been using a little bit more mixed methods approaches more recently, and I did in my PhD as well. But I've done some different studies. I've done some surveys recently, like surveying people about experiences in COVID and adapting choirs to going online and sort of things like that. So there are some different methodologies that I've toyed with, but I think the one that I tend to go towards is that sort of more experimental, pre-post, randomized design, to the extent that you can with the budget that you have. But also being aware of the need to set up pilot studies and do feasibility testing. That's where I'm at now. Like after finishing the Parkinson pilot study that I was talking about before, we were planning I had funding to go ahead and do a randomized control trial, and we couldn't because of COVID. So we had to shelve that. We shelved it and waited for a while, thinking that it would all settle down, and it hasn't. COVID's still rampaging around. So we've now sort of redesigned it as a feasibility study for doing Parkinson online. So that's happening, and I'm doing a similar thing with my the spinal injury research that I did from my PhD. Actually, well before COVID, sort of back in 2015, I did some research looking at how to make group singing more accessible for people. So this was before we had to self-isolate and do everything via Zoom anyway. But for people with spinal injury and in a big country like Australia, where we're kind of spread out, getting people with quite high-level physical restrictions to come in weekly to a centre or a hospital was just one of the barriers to recruitment. So like, surely if we know that this thing works, like we had some really good results from our small RCT, how can we get more people involved? Is there a way that we can deliver this online? Looking at using virtual reality as a way to make people feel like they were transported to a different place rather than sitting in their house in front of their computer doing a session.
It's amazing.
So it's pretty cool, pretty fun research. Got to play around with a lot of virtual reality headsets, and we ended up even designing our own music therapy app where we could go in and sit around a campfire and have lyrics scrolling in the sky and sing together and work, a very complicated way of rerouting ports and things so that the audio signal was less laggy than what it normally is. So it felt like it was in time enough to be able to sing together.
Yep.
So, and that obviously is even more relevant now than what it was back then, because everyone wants to find ways to do group music online together. So we're also again now at the next stage of that research, doing some planning feasibility testing, focusing more just on the in time part of it, the audio part. Technology keeps changing so quickly, so all of our VR headsets that we had for the first study are kind of obsolete. And the program that we developed doesn't work with any, it's just, that's one of the issues with working in the tech space.
Yeah,
it moves fast. But that was kind of the icing on the cake anyway. It's for me, it was more always about the audio and being able to do what we're doing now, sing together in time on Zoom or something like that. So we're about to do some more feasibility testing with that as well. Yeah, I feel really privileged to be working in an amazing research community and environment at the University of Melbourne. So we have the Creative Arts and Music Therapy Research Unit with, I don't know how many PhD students, could be 12 or 15 or so of them at the moment, and a whole lot of the staff as well, who are all doing really innovative and interesting, completely different types of research. So it's a great environment to be working in, and like very diverse things that people are researching, different approaches to research, different philosophies, different populations. But even within that group, I mean, we are quite a large group anyway. There is sort of a subset of us, I work closely with Professor Felicity Baker and Imogen Clark as well. And where we are sort of looking more at neurological conditions and dementia and things like that. So yeah, that's great to be in that environment.
Yeah. And what about internationally? Is there any particular research or a researcher that has inspired you from around the globe?
Tricky question in the context of what I've just said, because I feel like I'm already in a pretty inspirational environment.
Certainly are.
Yeah, so I think there would be people like I said, I'm very passionate about neurorehabilitation or neurological and neurodegenerative conditions. So within that context, and also kind of brain related research. So I've always been inspired by Wendy McGee. She's homegrown talent anyway, Australian. But, she's been doing some great work, and I have great respect for her research and, the MatterDoc that she's developed and the work that she's doing in her research. Also, other connections that I've had from a research community point of view are Teppo Sakamo in Finland, who's not a music therapist but collaborates with music therapists a lot and has done some great research in music interventions in stroke rehabilitation and also dementia, more recently in aging. So I like his research. Jorg Wagner's doing some really cool stuff with EMGs, measuring EMG, like brain signals in people with dementia. So all of that stuff I find inspiring. But I'm also inspired by my PhD students. I've got Tanya Silvera, who's doing really cool stuff with like functional electrical stimulation and using iPads in stroke rehabilitation. So yeah, it's everywhere. People are doing some cool research, and I love reading about it. I love being involved and supporting people, being inspired by people.
Yeah, I think you're in the perfect spot for that as well.
Yeah.
Inconceiving, I mean, you can pick which one you would like to discuss, whether it be your PhD or even your master's research. Inconceiving, your major research project focus, I mean, you kind of alluded to this already, but was it something in particular that motivated you, or just being surrounded by that in your workplaces? Because obviously, you've worked in that for a long period of time.
I think probably a similar thing motivates a lot of the research that I do. I mean, there's probably an underlying general inquisitivity, that's a word, just wanting to know, like wanting to find out stuff, but really from an advocacy perspective, advocacy and access to services, I think, is what drives a lot of the research that I do. So, but trying to build an evidence base for things that we're doing as music therapists so that we can argue for
more funding,
more research, better, more positions, expanded programs, going into areas that we haven't been before. So all of those things, I think it's really important to have research that supports the work that we do.
Absolutely.
To kind of be taken seriously and have some credibility. Like, you know, a lot of people kind of think music's great, but they don't necessarily understand how music therapy works and how it can do something that's potentially quite a functional outcome, maybe for, and also we haven't even talked about health economics, but looking at, you know, bang for your buck, and is it, you know, are you going to be spending more or less on this program versus that program, and how engaged are people going to be in it, and how motivating is it? So all of those things are really interesting to me as well. Like you could say, why would you do Parkinsons when there's an evidence-based speech technique called LSVT, which helps people improve their voice? So why do we need to do a singing intervention? But, you know, doing repeated exercises is not as motivating and engaging as singing. And it's, you know, it's that kind of being able to translate something into your life post-intervention that you can then maintain is really kind of a good argument for why to do that research, why to try that intervention, but then also why to research it and see if it actually does live up to. And so with our Parkinson pilot, we found effect sizes that were similar to this LSVT speech intervention in terms of getting people's voices louder over similar periods of time. So being able to compare, and then we give people options, you know, so it's not like this one is better or this one is better. It's like, well, there are some, you know, a variety of different things that you can do to improve your voice if you have Parkinson's, and some people might want to do singing, some people might not.
And how do you explain the purpose and outcomes of your research to people who are not music therapists?
I think it helps to learn to speak the lingo, to be able to speak in a language that people can understand. So I think as a music therapist, we potentially have our own kind of understanding or commonly used phrases that maybe we need to be a little bit more, we need to be conscious of explaining, or else we need to look at having a common language amongst ourselves. So that's, I think, one good thing that NMT's brought to music therapy. It's kind of like a common language that we can all use to describe different things that we're doing. And perhaps things that people may have been doing for a long time, but calling different things. So having a sort of a common language or a common understanding is helpful. And also helps us to be able to replicate research and findings and things as well. So yeah, I don't know if I've answered your question. Speaking the language though, I think, you know, learning what's important to your audience, changing up how you say things depending on who you're speaking to. If you're speaking to stakeholders, people with lived experience, medical community, and being able to adapt what you're saying so that it's meaningful for them, I think is any.
So we're coming up to our last question now, but why do you believe that music therapy research is important, and what would you say to someone who is considering doing music therapy research? I mean, you've actually discussed a fair bit of this anyway.
I'd say do it. I think music therapy research is important. I did talk about that already, because I think we need to, you know, provide a rationale. It's almost like a duty of care to say this, what we're doing has an impact on people. Some research isn't about efficacy. It isn't about effects. It's more about engagement or experience. I tend to talk from my perspective, which tends to be much more about the effects of an intervention, and what I'm doing, you know, has a carryover effect on someone's functional abilities. But there's also other types of research which are equally valid and do amazing things in different areas that I'm probably not as qualified to talk about.
Yeah.
But yeah, if someone was interested in doing music therapy research, I would say definitely explore it, you know, go for it. It's a really exciting thing to do. It's very rewarding, be frustrating at times as well. I've talked about a few frustrations along the way, but the positives definitely outweigh the negatives. Yeah. It's a great way to meet new people and to make new connections and partnerships with different organizations, and brings together that kind of, depends on the way that you do your research too. It can be very much clinical practice based. It's like you can be doing your sessions, but you're researching them as well. So it depends on how involved you want to be, or how much research budget you've got to employ other people to do parts of the research as well. But definitely a great way to learn a lot of skills, budget management and staff management, and all kinds of things can come into research as well. So it's
skills you wouldn't expect.
Yeah.
Is there anything else you would like to add?
No, I think I've waffled on long enough. Thanks for having me.
My pleasure. Thank you so much for your time today and for sharing your research and experience with the World Federation of Music Therapy community. We really appreciate your time today.
No problems. Thanks so much for having me.
What a great interview with Dr. Jeannette Tamplin from Melbourne, Australia. Hopefully it has inspired you to either look up some of her amazing research she discussed, or perhaps do some of your own research. Thank you for your time.